Is Lena Platt, for those who don't know me. And this here is my lovely assistant, Daniel Platt, my husband. And just to actually pick up on something that Deborah said, the case of Bolivia is very interesting. Do we have that pointer thing? We used to have a ruler or something to point?
I'll get the laser pointer.
No, don't get it so fancy. Just give me a ruler. Where's the ruler? Chuck, where's Chuck?
Okay.
Where's the ruler that you have?
Don't you want fusion technology? Don't you want to use a laser technology?
Not right now. I just want to point out some of these countries because I find that in the United States, since the media doesn't care to talk about any other place except it's a, riot or starvation or some crazy catastrophe, the U.S. does not talk about it. And this is Bolivia here that Deborah was talking about with the nuclear engineers from Argentina going to Bolivia, and she read you the quotes there from the vice president of Bolivia. Now the reason it's so interesting, LaRouche always talks, and Deborah read you earlier, about changing axioms. And if there's ever an axiom-changing business that's gone on recently, it's in Bolivia, because, could you put the BRICS picture up, please? Because 3 years ago, Bolivia elected a fellow named Evo Morales. Well, it's not a very good picture, but this is him here. Now, Evo Morales was elected on a campaign to legalize cocaine, ran a campaign all over South America, not only in Bolivia itself, but in Argentina and many other countries, to legalize cocaine. That cocaine was the, the lifeblood of the Indians, because the Indians chew coca, and that's why they could work hard, particularly up in the mountains in Peru and Bolivia. So he was really, acting like a scuzzball up to 3 years ago, got elected on a Coca-Cola platform. And now, 3 years later, with Argentina, with the BRICS, with the United States and the British acting crazy, he's almost changed personality. And now fighting, it's a landlocked country, we took it off, but anyway, it's a landlocked country, as you saw, fighting to get the most advanced scientific and technological development for Bolivia. And it's a similar thing in Egypt, more dramatic in a certain sense. But when she quoted LaRouche earlier, talking about how, talking not just about changing axioms, but talking about the fact that ideas, if you put them out and keep them out, and don't get downcast because somebody looks, askance at you or something, you just keep putting them out. If they're true, they will stick sooner or later. And that's what we've got going on our side. That's why we need to be very optimistic right now. So anyway, what I will try to do, if it's a lot to cover, I don't know if I can do the entire thing justice, but what I will try to do is go through a sort of a history, somewhat chronologically, of the fight for a new, just economic order, let's put it that way. And Lyndon LaRouche's leading role in impelling the process over 40 years. And that LaRouche now at almost 92 years of age can be very happy, and you've heard him, he's very excited, that what he fought for 40 odd years is coming to fruition, it's blossoming. And, we've got the crazies on the other side, of course, led by the British and Obama. But as Deborah said, this thing is moving, and it's unstoppable. Unless, of course, the lunatics decide to start thermonuclear war. So that's the question. So I'll go through a little bit of a chronology here, and try to use the board and go somewhat quickly. There's no eraser. basically, to start with, at the end of World War II, actually before the end of World War II, 44 nations got together in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, and set up the Bretton Woods, sorry, it's two T's, economic system, and they set up two key institutions. One was called the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which we know today as the World Bank. But that was what it was supposed to be in the beginning. Reconstruction, the end of the war, and development. So that was strictly to help rebuild the parts of the world that were shattered by the war. And then the other outfit was the International Monetary Fund. And the idea was that countries would countries would subscribe to the International Monetary Fund in terms of contributing money. You know, it's a fund. And then the fund would make loans, and for the reconstruction and reconstruction of places that were destroyed by the war, and development of places that had never been developed. And most of you know, and have read in our literature, that it was a very famous fight towards the end of the war. You see, the war hasn't ended yet. It's 1944. I forget what month it was. No, it was January. It went on from January 1st to January 22nd. And the fight at the time was that the war was coming to an end. Here, the whole world had been convulsed by a fight against colonialism, you know, racism, fascism, all the ugly stuff that was going on in Europe. And Franklin Roosevelt had in his mind that at the end of the war, the United States would promote newly independent sovereign nations built on the American model. And this old drunk on the other side, and he was always drunk actually, he drank sherry all the time, Churchill, said to Roosevelt, no, you know, at the end of the war we want to get our colonies back, and so on. And of course, to just shorten it, Roosevelt died too soon before the war actually ended. Truman came in. Churchill got his colonies back, including India, Guyana, every place, and continued the wretched policy that the whole world had just fought against. So, LaRouche, at the time, was a, I don't know what his rank was, but anyway, he was a soldier camping out in India in 1947, 1946 going into 47, at the time that India was now fighting for its independence, and of course India was the jewel in the British crown, the biggest possession and all that stuff. And so LaRouche was able to observe, he's written about it, the brutal methods used by the British to suppress the Indians in their fight for dignity and independence. Anyway, India finally won its independence. It's a long story. We went through it the last time. Maybe we'll go through it later if we have time. And out of that, India, you got the non-aligned thing? India, Egypt under Nasser, India under Nehru. Pictures are not that great, or maybe I need to put my glasses on. Okay, this is very important. People have forgotten these things. It was called the non-aligned movement. And when it started, it represented 55% of the world's population, over 2 billion people. And you know, this is in the 1950s, 1956. These are the fellows that started the non-aligned movement. This is Nehru, of course, the father of independent India. Kwame Nkrumah, the first independent nation in Africa. Gamal Abdel Nasser, Deborah just mentioned him, Egypt. Sukarno of Indonesia, and Bandung, Indonesia is where the first non-aligned conference was held. And this was Tito, Joseph Broz Tito of Yugoslavia. And we know what's happened to him. So they founded an outfit, founded an organization, non-aligned, in the sense that now with the Iron Curtain and all that stuff and the Cold War coming about, they said we are going to have nations that are not aligned either to the Eastern Bloc under the Soviet Union or the Western Bloc under NATO. And it was the majority of the world's population, essentially. So that was formed actually formally in 1961, although they had had this conference putting it together. Let me read you actually a little bit about what they demanded. Because it's, it is not taught anymore how important the United States and the American Revolution is still, in spite of our terrible condition, to the world. So, this thing is upside down. Anyway, so they're talking about the leaders. These leaders, particularly Sukarno, explicitly appeal to the anti-colonial principles of the American Revolution and Franklin D. Roosevelt. Noting that the conference was meeting on the anniversary of Paul Revere's ride, Sukarno paid tribute to the American War of Independence as, quote, the first successful anti-colonialist war in history, unquote, while noting that, quote, the battle which began 180 years ago is not yet completely won, unquote. He's referring to the American Revolution. He went on to blast free trade as colonialist and to refer to Roosevelt's well-known concepts of conquering fear and poverty. Okay, so the non-aligned founding document demanded, number one, immediate suspension of the foreign debt payment of the poorest countries and those countries subjected to imperialist pressures. Number two, a new universal monetary system which should replace the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. Number three, the creation of new liquidity which should be automatically coupled to the needs of worldwide development. Those are the three, number four. The world community of nations should be included in this universal system by means of triangular trade agreements among the developing sector, i.e. the third world, the socialist countries, i.e. the East Bloc, and the developed countries of the OECD, i.e. the West. So this is what they laid out at this time. We're talking about 1956. And then not jump so far, Indira Gandhi then took leadership of the non-aligned movement as president of India. She came in 1966 and started advancing the fight, but on a global scale. Indira Gandhi, becoming now not just a leader of India, but a leader fighting for decolonization. India is now independent, 1947. And fighting to get decolonization for all the colonies all over the world, Africa, the Caribbean, etc., etc., etc. So that was what's going on. In 1971, I'm going chronologically now, there's a famous New Federalist headline, which I couldn't find, which is entitled, Nixon Pulls the Plug, which is when Nixon took the dollar off of gold and essentially ended the Bretton Woods system. We went to this crazy floating exchange rate system, and then set in motion the basis by which the IMF in particular and other institutions and private banks could now loot based on manipulating the value of currencies, up or down. They could put a whole bunch of money to drive the value of a currency up, and then sell and make the money at that high thing, and the value of the currency would collapse. And it didn't matter because they were it's like the guys do on Wall Street today. The effect on the nations whose currencies they were attacking did not matter. So it's in this context, therefore, that in 1975, Lyndon LaRouche went to Iraq, of all places, met with the leadership of the Ba'ath Party and made his first call for what he called a new world economic order and an international development bank. You hear the resonance to what Deborah was talking about earlier. So LaRouche then in 1975-76 ran for president under the US Labor Party with the key plank in his presidential platform, an international development bank. And then in 1975, these are the this is actually a set of statues in Georgetown, Guyana, because one of the first non-aligned conferences when I was still in high school was held there, and these are 4 of the non-aligned leaders they've got there. But you got to be with Fred Wills. So now, this LaRouche fight now is brought to the international stage by the foreign minister of Guyana, sitting to your right, Fred Wills. You might have a better picture of him later, in which he goes to the United Nations and he stands on the podium and he says, the time has come to declare a debt moratoria. And then repeats LaRouche, without naming LaRouche's name, calling for an international development bank and describing graphically the genocide that had been wrought on these countries, and I mean genocide. And not just, you don't pay, so, we're going to impose austerity, you got to cut this program, stop subsidizing the rice for the farmers and things like that. But depopulation policies, where the World Bank in particular, and also the IMF, went to countries and said, if you want to get 6 more months to pay this loan, you got to sterilize 500,000 women. And you got to meet this quota by the time the 6 months come and show me proof that 500,000 women, in wherever this was, they did this bad in Jamaica, were sterilized. And yeah, well, they may fuss, but we're going to give them a transistor radio. I'm not kidding. So this is what they were doing. And worse than Africa, much worse. We don't have the time. Maybe that some other time I'll go through the African aspect of the non-aligned and everything, because of course with Nkrumah, Africa was also key. We're just going to focus largely on South America today. So anyway, so that's what they did. So when Fred Wills gets up there and describes in graphic detail the depopulation policy of the World Bank and the IMF in the name of collecting debt, then many of the other nations started to join this chorus. And Lyndon LaRouche, who had been fighting in his own way, meeting with different people, I don't know all the different people that he was meeting with, but was meeting with many of the principals who ended up leading this fight over the next 10, 20 years. And so anyway, in 1976, the following year, the same Fred Wills, at the non-aligned conference, this is 1976, now they're up to 85 nations, now calling for an international development bank at the UNCTAD, United Nations Committee of Trade and Development. That's what UNCTAD stands for. In Kenya, made the same call. And then you started getting it picked up by Peru, getting it picked up by Mexico, getting it picked up by certain countries in Africa, etc. By 1978-79, you remember, I skipped it, but you remember in 1973 they had the so-called oil hoax or oil shock, which sent most of the third world countries into a tailspin because they were buying oil to function and not just to run your car, just to basically get things like kerosene to cook. And now the price had quintupled and stuff like that. So 78, 79, Mexico discovers huge deposits of oil. They knew they had oil, but now they discovered huge deposits. And Lyndon LaRouche then started a campaign of what he called Oil for Technology, in which he visited a number of these countries, and he said that what they should do, like Mexico, he also actually said this for the Middle Eastern countries who were getting a lot of money from the oil sales to the West. LaRouche said, you know, Mexico, you sell whoever oil, and you sell the United States oil, the United States is going to exchange technology, no money. Just like LaRouche always talks about credit, production, etc., that it's not money. So LaRouche developed this thing which was adopted by many of these countries, although it, of course, went against what the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund were pushing. In the meantime, LaRouche was organizing for the Strategic Defense Initiative and talking to Ronald Reagan and telling Ronald Reagan that not only could this bridge the gap between the Soviet Union, or the East Bloc and the West, by developing a technology that can make nuclear missiles impotent and obsolete, the Strategic Defense Initiative. But LaRouche was pushing the idea that the spin-off technologies would revolutionize the whole world economy, and focusing particularly on these so-called third world nations, underdeveloped nations, technology transfer to develop these nations. So this was the, up to 1980, this was what LaRouche was involved in. We can go into more detail later. 1982, Lyndon LaRouche meets with Jose Lopez Portillo, the president of Mexico. Do we have a picture of that?
Not of Lyndon Portillo, no.
Oh, okay. Anyway, he meets with Lopez Portillo in Mexico. Lopez Portillo describes to LaRouche the terrible debt that Mexico is now burdened with, even though they got a lot of oil, the terrible debt that they're burdened with because of the scam that's run with the currencies that I described earlier. So LaRouche is contracted or offered or something to write a document called Operation Juarez. Oh my. Yeah, if you've got one. I got several colors here, but don't seem like too many of them work. Operation Juarez. I'm going to put the English one, no? Operación Juarez. And the idea was surveying the Latin American situation, Ibero-American situation. LaRouche campaigning now as the leading champion, not just the third world development, but destroying the remnants of the British Empire, which now appear under a new guise called the World Bank and the IMF. LaRouche committed to destroying them, visited Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, etc., and got the key player in this regard, because of Mexico's oil, which was Lopez Portillo, to agree that after LaRouche wrote him this document, that they are going to form, on LaRouche's direction, what he called a debtors club or a debtors cartel. And these countries would collectively declare a debt moratorium and bring the whole damn system down. Lopez Portillo agreed, took the point at the relevant time, but the problem is the other two big nations that were supposed to join him, Brazil under a fellow named Jose Sarney, he probably got a call from Kissinger, and Argentina, which was still at the end of a military dictatorship, was just coming in, a fellow named Raúl Alfonsín. They got cold feet or got threatened or who knows what, so that Jose Lopez Portillo ended up being on his own in front of the international murderers. And so it didn't work. And they crushed Mexico. Mexico went on for NAFTA and all the crazy stuff. Went on, we wrote a thing on it. This report here, see? Says Free Trade Pact. George Hitler Bush's Mexican Holocaust. This is on NAFTA. LaRouche called it Auschwitz below the border. Forecasting exactly what would happen to Mexico because they were crushed. And that's what happened. So then Jose Lopez Portillo did have the guts to nationalize the banks in Mexico, which really made London and Wall Street mad. And then Jose Lopez Portillo went to the United Nations General Assembly, chronicling, as Fred Wills did, the destruction of Ibero-America through the debt. When he returned home, he declared the debt moratorium that I mentioned. He was abandoned by Brazil and Argentina, and the whole thing flopped. Go ahead.
Wasn't it Peru with Alan Garcia, not Argentina?
No, that was later on. I'm going to get to that. Yeah. So anyway, in the meantime, the oligarchy, the London Wall Street crowd, decide LaRouche is too dangerous. We have to crush him. If he could go and get Mexico and Argentina and Brazil, even though they got cold feet, the latter two, to do something that can bring the whole system down, this is a dangerous person. And so they moved, beginning in the early 80s through 1986 and beyond, to prosecute LaRouche, eventually putting him in jail from 1989 to 1994, when Bill Clinton essentially got him out. These countries suffered, lost millions of people because LaRouche was jailed. LaRouche's wife, Helga Zepp LaRouche, valiantly campaigned in China and all over the place. She went, I think you've got a picture, there she is, while LaRouche is in jail with Jose Lopez Portillo, meeting with him. He called her Doña Helga, and saying that she's, coming with LaRouche's voice. And Helga Zepp LaRouche continued valiantly to campaign because she knew that that millions of people were being destroyed because this fight had been lost. Hadn't really been lost, it turns out, but at least temporarily lost. So then 1987, the fight's picked up again by a fellow named Dilson Funaro. Some of the people who've been members a while might remember him, of Brazil, the foreign minister of Brazil. Gets up. Did you give me a new marker?
Yeah, here it is.
It's under your paper there.
Huh? No, these are the ones that are not working, I think.
That's a good one.
Gets up. This is Brazil. This is a big country, obviously. The biggest country in South America. Bigger than Mexico by far. And this is 1987. Picks up the fight for a debt moratorium. I don't remember who. The president of Brazil at the time was this guy, wimpish Jose Sarney. He wasn't a bad guy, but he didn't have any guts. But he did, Funaro did convince Brazil to declare a unilateral debt moratorium, but basically it was too late. It didn't function. And Funaro was sacked about 4 months later. Then, going quickly, the United States overthrew Noriega, who was a leading fighter against the IMF and World Bank. In Mexico, a fellow named Miguel de la Madrid was elected, put Mexico under the GATT, General Agreement of Trade and Tariffs, which Jose Lopez Portillo had bitterly opposed. And the NAFTA talks started the next year with George Bush Sr. In the meantime, in 1988, the same Fred Wills of Guyana, the one that we started out with, addresses the Schiller Institute conference, and he says to a bunch of international people gathered there, addressing this question of the debt and the defeat, quote unquote, he says, "We shall win because our cause is just." Now, 1988 then, Peru picked up the fight. A fellow named Alan Garcia, Eric was just referring to him, and tried to not just declare a debt moratorium, but tried to go with the whole idea of picking up and gathering a bunch of nations together, South American nations together, for a collective debt moratorium, the debtors cartel that we talked about. The day that LaRouche was supposed to meet Garcia in Peru, there was an unsuccessful military coup. So that LaRouche couldn't land, but the coup was not successful. But LaRouche was not able to you know, solidify what Peru was doing, which was not just about Peru, was about the whole continent. And then by 1989, in the rocket docket in Virginia, you know, LaRouche is carted off to jail, including Dennis Small, who was one of our more important guys in Ibero-America. And I showed you Helga Zepp LaRouche with Lopez Portillo in 1992. 2000, actually let me go, if you think of 1999, 1998, 1997, Bill Clinton is in office. Bill Clinton is talking of a new financial architecture, echoing this idea, new world economic order, a new development bank, a new monetary system. You got the Russian crisis, the GKO crisis, the Asia currency crises of 1997. Bill Clinton comes into office. Bill Clinton is faced with this situation, consults, I don't know how directly, with Lyndon LaRouche, but Lyndon LaRouche is now writing papers, etc., on how the United States should deal with the Russian crisis and the Asian crisis to prevent bringing the whole world financial system down. And Clinton made this famous speech. Where was it that he made the speech? You remember? Huh? Isn't that interesting? In front of the New York Council of Foreign Relations, Clinton makes this speech saying, we're facing the worst financial crisis in 50 years. We need a new financial architecture. Bill Clinton. And after that, Monica Lewinsky came up in the blue dress from the basement, and it never was the same. That's exactly what happened. So, 2000, August, Fujimori, Peru's got a new president now, named Alberto Fujimori. You're keeping up with me, huh, Danielle? I'm going kind of fast. Alberto Fujimori. This is another guy changing axioms. Anyway, he comes in, I don't remember what year exactly. This would be right around 1998, 99. He's a free market, free trade, doctrinaire, Wall Street fellow. But facing a situation, not just in Peru, but seeing that the whole continent was being destroyed, Fujimori goes to Brazil, again, Brazil, and calls for a United States of South America and a debt moratorium. The United States of South America, by the way, exists today. It's called UNASUR. You heard us talking about it lately. Yeah. And actually, I forget who's coming. Guyana was just the president of that for a while. Anyway, so now, okay, so LaRouche is scheduled to meet with Fujimori in October that year. He went to Brazil in August. LaRouche was scheduled to meet with Fujimori in October that year. The plan was that LaRouche would not only address the military high command in Peru about the plot, as this says in Spanish, to annihilate the armed forces of the nations of Ibero-America, because the militaries of these countries were standing up against the drug cartels, which were taking over under the free market, free trade, GATT, floating exchange currency business. The militaries were the only defense that they had against their nations being taken over by the drug lords, which unfortunately happened in places like Colombia, and so on. So, you know, LaRouche was going to address the military command, high command in Peru, and it was supposed to be televised to all the military colleges in Peru, and then LaRouche was supposed to leave Peru and to go to Brazil. Fujimori was overthrown 1 week later, and I want to read the Los Angeles Times role in it, if I can get my papers straight.
What year was this?
This is 2000. August is when Fujimori went to Brazil. I had a thing from the LA Times, I thought. And October is when he was overthrown. You know, literally here's the LA Times on August the 31st. Remember, he made this speech sometime earlier in August in Brazil, calling for a United States of South America and a debt moratorium. And by by the end of August, the Los Angeles Times, in a long article, ends the article by saying, quote, "The Fujimori regime has hardened its tone with anti-American diatribes and a strange affinity for the right-wing ramblings of the US-based Lyndon LaRouche movement. His regime could become a model and a trend." 2 months later, August, September, October, Fujimori was overthrown. So that's our ever-loving LA Times here. And I'll go quickly. By 2001, this is very important now in terms of what Deborah was saying. Argentina elects a fellow named Rodriguez Saa, I don't remember his first name, elected president of Argentina. In between December 2001, when he was elected, and August 2002, the Argentine peso had been devalued under IMF diktat by 73%. Huh?
Name, Argentina.
Huh?
Argentina.
The Argentine peso had been devalued by 73% between December 2001, which is when this president came in, and August 2002. This Rodriguez Saa, many of his family members and political circles were all EIR subscribers.
Nina, weren't they also invading literally the drug lords going into the governments?
Say it again.
Weren't they invading the governments, holding people hostage, the government leaders in some of these countries to topple them or bring down the governments?
Possibly, I'm not.
Yeah, in Fujimori, yeah. They actually went into the court and held hostage the government leaders for about a month.
Who did?
That was in Colombia.
Was it in Colombia?
Yeah.
Oh, that was in Colombia, sure, we wrote that up, we were involved in that.
In other words, they were deployed to just terrorize these countries. And
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Anyway, so Rodriguez Saa suspended debt payments. He was sworn in that particular day. He got up in the middle of the night and at midnight declared a suspension of all the debt payments in Argentina. And I think people generally know that Argentina, which is a very advanced country, technologically, culturally, and otherwise, largely because much of their population were immigrants from Europe at the turn of the century, from Italy, etc., but also fleeing from the war, fleeing from Germany, fleeing from Latvia, fleeing from all these places. And Argentina collected quite a core of scientific minds and cultural minds in terms of classical music and things like that. It's a very advanced country. So they had been brought to their knees, where we reported, for example, our Dennis Small was there in May 2001 and reported of whole families going to the backs of the restaurants and picking through the garbage. I guess we've got that in the US now. Picking through the garbage of the stuff that the people didn't eat, from the rich restaurants to try to feed their families, and just terrible things. The country had been brought to its knees in a very short period of time. Imagine if, you've got $1 in December 2001, and 9 months later, by August 2002, that dollar is now only worth 27 cents. That's a 73% devaluation in about 7 months. That's what they did to Argentina. Break it, bring it to its knees. Because one of the biggest cores of scientific support for LaRouche's SDI was in Argentina. A big amount of support, campaigning among the militaries in South America for nuclear energy and for the SDI was based in Argentina because of our work there in Argentina, and LaRouche meeting with many of the politicos in Argentina. So anyway, he suspended the debt payment. LaRouche was in Brazil in 2002, and then in 2003, LaRouche was made an honorary Brazilian.
Citizen of Sao Paulo.
Honorary citizen of Sao Paulo. Now, here we get to 2003, and then we're going to play a video. 2003, Nestor Kirchner comes into office, is elected. Argentina had 6 presidents in the span of about 2 years or less. 6 presidents. Fine. This is Nestor Kirchner here. Comes into office, 2003, the country is just, you know, devastated. Nestor Kirchner says, you know, we're not only debt payments suspended since 2001, he says, okay, look, you say we owe $100, we're going to give you 25 cents on the dollar. Ni un centavo más, not 1 penny more. And as Deborah was outlining, 93% of the so-called creditors, these vulture funds that Mrs. Kirchner, his wife, who's now the president, 93% of these so-called creditors, the people who bought the Argentine bond for 5 cents on the dollar from some distressed person, you know, and wanted the whole dollar, he said, we'll give you 25 cents, which is rather generous, because you only bought it for 5 cents. and so 93% of the fellows, the bondholders, were, I don't know how to describe it, maybe human enough, to say, okay, 25 cents is better than nothing. And they took it. The 7% that Deborah refers to as the vulture funds, the remaining 7%, are the ones who have been using the U.S. courts and a corrupt Obama administration and Bush administration before to take a sovereign country and try to hold it to ransom by using our courts in Manhattan to say, we're going to seize your boat, we're going to seize your accounts, if you got money in the United States, banks, we're going to seize whatever you've got in the United States. They even tried to say they're going to seize their embassy. And you know, embassies are actually the national territory, quote unquote, of the relevant government. But this is the kind of thing that they were doing. And 2 years later, in 2005, Nestor Kirchner, in a couple of cases with the bondholders, gave them 35 cents instead of 25 cents, a couple of holdouts. But these fellows here wanted the whole dollar, the whole thing. This is what provoked then, on July the 3rd of this year, the Organization of American States calling an emergency meeting of foreign ministers. This is Christina Kirchner, the now president. That's her husband, who died, and she took over. So on July the 3rd, one day before Independence Day, the Organization of American States, which is just as it says, all the way from American states, huh? Meaning all the way from here, including Canada, this is North America, all the way to Tierra del Fuego, you probably can't see. The Organization of American States, representing all these countries, were called to an emergency meeting in Washington, D.C., which is where the headquarters of the OAS is. And the judge had voted against Argentina. You got to pay the whole thing to these vulture guys, and so on. And so these governments, the persons of their foreign ministers, had to come and make a momentous historic decision. Are you little St. Lucia, or, because there's a whole bunch of countries you might not notice very well, but the Organization of American States includes all of these countries here, and some of them are just little dots, but they're countries, you know, like St. Lucia and all, you know, plenty little ones, and of course Cuba and all these places. I should have tried to figure out how many countries it was, but you can see there's a whole bunch of them. And they had to come together and make a decision as to whether they're going to stand behind Argentina because they're all in the same boat, or they may be in a leakier boat than Argentina, understanding that if Argentina is broken by this vote, by the OAS vote going in favor of the crazy vulture funds, backing up the decision of this judge that apparently calls himself Greasy, but his name is Riesa. I don't know what his first name is. He's the Manhattan judge that, you know, wants to put Argentina in jail and take all their stuff, give it to Wall Street. So anyway, so they called an emergency meeting, and we'll put ropes back up there. And so this fellow, I'm going to play you a little bit of his speech. We don't have the video, unfortunately. They still didn't have it. This is Ropes and Men, who happens to be my brother, my oldest brother. And here he is at the OAS, representing Guyana with that nice flag. And I'll tell you a little bit about what he says, because, well, you hear what he says, and then we'll just play two little excerpts to get an idea of how they understand that this is a fight for humanity. This is not just about Argentina. This is not just about Guyana. This is not even just about the American states. Do you have it?
I'm going to have to find it because somehow it got lost when we moved your computer.
Oh,
It's in your email, right?
it's in my email. Anything I've said quickly that, any clarification before we go to the big stuff is if you look under my email on July 3rd. You see all those emails you're sending me, Shan? Shan's filling up my box. No. Go to July 3rd. Yeah, hold on. There you go. And read where she says, did you find the time when he starts?
No, I remember it.
Okay.
Yes. What years?
Senora,
What years were Toledo president of Peru?
Who?
Toledo
Toledo was, I think, right before Fujimori.
before.
Before Fujimori, yes.
And
I think
Court,
between,
the Second Circuit Court of Appeal.
Did he have any role in any of this? I know he was pretty corrupt, right?
yeah, no, he was a Wall Street boy, as was Salinas de Gortari in Mexico. Do you have it?
Yeah, you check.
Okay. We'll just play a little bit.
The government has never had to engage
This
in
is
any
Lucia.
significant but empty.
the meet is up. La lista de oradores con Guyana. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Secretary General, ladies and gentlemen, ministers. Having heard the presentations by the distinguished ministers of Foreign Affairs and Finance of Argentina, the government of Guyana wishes to lend its support to the government and people of Argentina on their sovereign debt issues and the implications of the U.S. court rulings in favor of the holdout vulture funds. Guyana is concerned that these court rulings will have profound and potentially devastating consequences for Argentina's financial stability and economic progress. Vulture funds could nullify the benefits of debt relief that other creditors have provided to the debt-burdened countries, since money saved that should be used to fund poverty reduction and other development programs are instead to repay the vulture funds, as already was the case of the republics of Peru and the Congo. Argentina has been making valiant efforts to pay its debt in difficult circumstances and has time and again manifested its intentions to meet its obligations to its creditors. As a sovereign state, Argentina is entitled to every opportunity to pursue its national development priorities without being held hostage to vulture funds who are in the practice of preying on developing countries that have experienced debt problems. I would note to Mr. Chairman that much of the debt in Latin America and in poor third world developing countries were contracted at a time when these countries were under undemocratic, despotic management. One has to ask the question, where is the democratic financial dividend that will redound to the benefit of these countries who have mostly now turned to peace-loving, progressive, democratic countries throughout Latin America significantly. This matter goes beyond, Mr. Chairman, the predicament for Argentina, which would have to pay about $120 billion to all its bondholders, which would devastate its economy. These court rulings have also set legal precedents, which could have profound consequences for the welfare of developing countries and the international financial system. Namely, future debt restructuring will even be more difficult since these court rulings remove the financial incentives for creditors to participate in debt settlement arrangements. Debt relief already provided to poor countries could be effectively nullified through having to use funds intended to reduce poverty and foster development to pay vulture funds.
Going to go towards the end.
Acuerdos de todas las representantes.
Pursue efforts to put back in place out of this imbroglio, relook at the overall question of the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act in 1999 in the United States, which related to the activity of the banking system, the international financial institutions, mainly resident in the United States and in the United Kingdom. President Roosevelt of the United States of America established a Banking Act in 1933, signed off on the Banking Act of 1933, which set up firewalls between the activities of the banks and on the questions of speculation in the financial system. There is perhaps the need now to take a look at putting back in place the important sections of the Glass-Steagall Act, which was repealed in 1999. I would mention too that Mr. Obama, who was then candidate Obama at Cooper Union in New York in March 2008, said, by the time the Glass-Steagall Act was repealed in 1999, the $300 million lobbying effort that drove deregulation was more about facilitating mergers than creating an efficient regulatory framework. Instead of establishing a 21st century regulatory framework, we simply dismantled the old one, thereby encouraging a winner-take-all, anything-goes environment that helped foster devastating dislocations in our economy. And we know the devastation, dislocations in the United States economy in 2008 had even more devastation, dislocating effects in the world financial system. So we need to perhaps to review the question or call upon the United States legislators to pursue efforts to put back in place the type of regulation in the banking system which would prevent vulture funds, which would prevent this response whereby there is this form which I only term modern day piracy. Modern day piracy which has serious implications for the world economy and for, particularly now in the case of Argentina, a very significant country in Latin America, severe implications for its economy and which would create a cascading effect in Latin America and Central America and elsewhere. Guyana stands in solidarity with Argentina, development partners and the international community in rejecting and condemning the actions of vulture funds that put in jeopardy progress made by these countries. In this regard, Guyana supports calls and efforts for the implementation of legislation that would support the organized settlement of debt obligations that are in default and which limit the action of vulture funds. Guyana also recognizes the significant impact that the rulings against Argentina would have on the international financial system and the implications for the sovereignty of countries. Guyana therefore supports calls to ensure the protection of the international financial system and the preservation of the sovereign rights of countries. The dilemma and struggle of the people and government of Argentina resonates with all developing countries. It is a moral responsibility of all stakeholders, including the American people and their government, to ensure that countries such as Argentina, that have made significant strides in improving their debt situation, are protected from vulture funds that threaten to undo the progress that has been achieved. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, we welcome the pronouncement from members of the international community, such as UNASUR and CELAC on this matter, and we endorse their calls for the support of the Sister Republic of Argentina. I thank you.
The Sister Republic of Argentina. You notice his inferences about the American legislators and the American people and so on. But, you know, again, in terms of this matter of ideas and LaRouche's ideas, when LaRouche set out in 1975 with this whole idea of an international development bank, probably, as the LA Times tried to say much later, you know, it was viewed as some kind of a crazy, out of space, weird thing by most people in the United States, even if they knew about it, which I don't know that people did, and most of Europe, most of the so-called developed nations. And just that LaRouche idea of 1975, starting in Iraq of all places, didn't really start there, but that's where he apparently made the first public pronouncement. As I described, you know, jumping sort of, catching fire, going through 2 decades, until now with the Argentina case where the fight is joined. And so when you hear LaRouche's excitement, and people read it too, and he says, I forget exactly how, something to the effect that the whole world has changed, seemingly all of a sudden. And he describes that he says South America is solid. He says Central America is solid. And of course, what he says about China and Russia and so on, that this thing cannot be turned back. It's not going to be turned back. What happened in 1982 with Mexico and Brazil and so on, this has now taken over most of humanity. It's taken over China, which is a big place, big population, Russia, India, South Africa, etc. It's not going to be turned back. The only issue is if we do the work that we need to do quickly, because we don't have a lot of time. You read every day what the crazies are doing. If we do our work quickly enough in time so that we can preempt them going for this thermonuclear confrontation with Russia and or China, because that's the only card they've got to play now. They have no other cards left. This is what I was just saying. LaRouche on August the 13th said, the world has suddenly changed for mankind. And, you know, going through what Deborah said and what I said, you get an idea of that. Now, I also want to play you a video of the president of Argentina, Mrs. Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner. And you watch and see that even more so than some of the ones that I talked about, Lopez Portillo, Alan Garcia, Alfonsín, and these other ones. I mean, you did have statesmen in those days. You know, you had world leaders of character. We can't find one nowadays. You know, if you look at Europe, if you look at, except for maybe China and India to some extent, maybe with the new fellow that's come in, you don't have statesmen who operate from the standpoint of a leader on the world stage. We haven't had that. And what you have, I'm going to play you, this is the same ropes and bend. It's not a very good picture, but one of the things, you notice is the Chinese. They are expanding the airport. There's a big fight because the NGOs and the British are saying, oh, you're going to destroy the Amazon and all kinds of terrible things. You're going to kill the flies and who knows what. But a fight where the Chinese are building, just like Deborah was describing in Africa, all kinds of projects. And this is just making it into an international airport that can handle big planes, but there are other projects also which the NGOs, the World Bank, etc., are hysterically running an anti-China racist policy on the population in Guyana, using the political opposition, just like they're doing in other places, to sabotage developments in these countries in the name of saving the Amazon and saving the flies or whatever particular little insect that they're trying to save, that the world's going to come to an end if this little insect becomes extinct. But in contrast, you got that video of this. Watch, get a sense.
Let's get the cell phone off.
Okay. I don't. Huh?
Oh, it's too loud. Okay. People should turn off their cell phones if they have.
I don't remember how long this video is.
It's about 5 minutes.
Okay, good. And then we can take questions. I know I covered a lot.
Habla para todo el país la señora presidenta de la Nación, doctora Cristina Fernández de Kirchner.
Gracias. Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias en serio. Muy buenas tardes a todos y a todas, señor gobernador de la provincia, señor intendente, científicos, operarios, ingenieros, obreros. La verdad que cuando recién presioné y apreté los dos pulsores, el que dieron comienzo al rotor de la turbina y el otro, el que ya hace ingresar el agua para enfriamiento, al iniciar las tareas de esta Tucha 2, que era el símbolo también no solamente de la postergación en algo que fuimos pioneros. Recién leíamos la carta que nos dirigiera el señor Amano, titular de la Organización Internacional de Naciones Unidas en materia de energía nuclear, la máxima autoridad a nivel global, cuando nos decía que nuestro país, hace casi 40 años, para ser más precisos, en 1974, ponía en marcha Atucha 1, convirtiéndose en el primer país latinoamericano en operar una central nuclear. Yo siento que, como cuando estuvimos hace poco en Yacyretá, como cuando él decidió terminar con la deuda con el Fondo Monetario Internacional, cuando decidimos reestructurar también la deuda en el 2005 y el año pasado para finalizar con esa espada de Damocles permanentemente sobre el crecimiento de la República Argentina. ¡Qué increíble! Los mismos operarios que tal vez también aquí mantuvieron vivo durante los años de parálisis esta maravillosa planta para que hoy, y yo les agradezco a ustedes que han sido custodios de la soberanía nacional, los obreros. Ellos me contaban que cuando ingresaron a la planta donde hoy estaba la turbina, un inmenso galpón lleno de búhos y ratas, porque esto fue paralizado en 1994, cuando él decidió poner en marcha nuevamente el plan nuclear argentino. En el año 2006 estaba recuperando uno de los bastiones más importantes del desarrollo tecnológico argentino y ha sido pionero en América Latina. Yo siento que estamos cubriendo, que somos la generación, esta generación del bicentenario, la que está cubriendo todas las deudas históricas que se han generado durante décadas, o de abandono, de equivocaciones, o de malas políticas, o también de injerencias externas para que Argentina no tenga desarrollo nuclear. Hemos recuperado la voluntad, hemos recuperado la decisión de que el país debe gobernarse a sí mismo. Me acuerdo cuando vine con él. Me acuerdo cuando vine con él la primera vez en el 2007 para cerrar el núcleo. Tengo una foto, sí, tengo una foto de él y mía, los dos con casco. Y la verdad que siento mucha emoción de hoy. Y la verdad que hoy siento mucha emoción porque sé que desde algún lado él lo está viendo y está viendo que todo lo que hizo no fue en vano, que valió la pena. Acá hay, en esta obra, decía recién la locutora, hay 2.200 millones de pesos, pero hay algo más. El 88% de ese dinero son insumos y suministros argentinos y mano de obra de trabajadores argentinos. Son además los más de 800 técnicos y operarios calificados que retornaron luego de que comenzamos a impulsar nuevamente la cuestión nuclear. Aquí se han formado más de 900 soldadores nucleares en estos años, más de 100 técnicos, más de 200 operarios especializados. Esto es también capacitación, pero además estamos aumentando la participación de la generación por energía nuclear del 7 al 10%, diversificando nuestra matriz energética. Y por si esto fuera poco, hemos incorporado en estos 8 años 7.422 megavatios. Con estos megavatios estamos llegando a 8.122 megavatios más desde el año 2003 a la fecha, 45,4 de lo que teníamos cuando Néstor Kirchner asumió como presidente de la República Argentina. Que se escuche bien la cifra, que se escuche bien la cifra. Hemos incorporado 8.122 megavatios más, 45,4% de lo que generábamos en el 2003. Y no es solamente energía lo que se incorporó, porque se pudo incorporar esa energía, porque en estos 8 años se abrieron fábricas, talleres, comercios que demandaron esa energía. Por eso tuvimos que generar tanta energía y todavía tenemos que seguir generando más. Porque hemos protagonizado, los argentinos hemos protagonizado en estos 8 años el crecimiento económico más importante de toda último año, en el 2010, tenemos el orgullo también, y en lo que va del 2011, de ser el segundo país después de China que más ha crecido su economía en todo el mundo. Me siento orgullosa como presidenta de todos los argentinos. Y tenemos que ir por más en este plan nuclear argentino. Por eso las próximas metas tienen que ser la puesta en marcha del alargamiento de vida de embalse de Río Tercero. La segunda, la construcción de Atucha 3. Y también la construcción del reactor nuclear Karen, y con esta increíble central nuclear, como que estamos poniendo en marcha una maquinaria que era nuestro país, la República Argentina, que supo ser líder en todos los campos en América Latina, en materia nuclear, en materia aérea, en materia de construcción de ferrocarriles, en materia automotriz, en materia científica. Miren, qué país hemos sido. Y permítanme decirles que por supuesto que las cosas que nos han pasado han tenido responsabilidad, hemos tenido responsabilidad nosotros los argentinos, pero también creo que tal vez a alguno no le interesaba que la Argentina pudiera alcanzar ese magnífico desarrollo que estaba adquiriendo allá por los años 70, donde estábamos despegando en todos los planos y donde los trabajadores también habían alcanzado un grado de participación en el ingreso nacional muy importante, durante que descollábamos en las ciencias y en todo el desarrollo de nuestra industria. Quiero decirles también que entonces mi compromiso no es solamente ser una generación que pague deudas, sino también la generación que vuelva a poner en marcha esa maquinaria formidable y maravillosa que es la nación argentina, que cuenta además, como esta central cuenta con combustible nuclear. Yo digo que la maquinaria argentina cuenta con el mejor combustible que tenemos, el pueblo argentino y su fuerza. Ese es el combustible de la maquinaria, y tenemos que ponernos de pie, los argentinos todos, para seguir asegurando que esa maquinaria nunca más nadie la pueda detener, que siga su marcha indetenible para lograr más crecimiento, más justicia, más igualdad, más libertad, más democracia, más patria para todos. Muchas gracias y felicitaciones a todos.
What are we going to build over here?
Now you see why the vultures want to stop her.
Want to kill her. Remember, she's already had an unnecessary surgery a year or so ago. So has Rousseff, by the way. Dilma Rousseff in Brazil. So, anyway, I covered a lot, I know, very fast. But the basic idea, as with Argentina, as with what I described with Mexico, as in the situation in Guyana, because whatever Daniel and I have gone back to Guyana since 1992, after the dreadful government of 28 years was overthrown. Not overthrown, was kicked out of office through election. We've met with the president, we've met with cabinet ministers, we've talked to them about LaRouche. When my dad was ambassador in Canada, he sent the EIR in the diplomatic pouch every week so that the cabinet could read back there. This is LaRouche's ideas taking over the world. And we have to, we have to have this idea that, as she said towards the end, that it really is unstoppable. I think LaRouche has a sense that it's unstoppable. And, you know, if we convey this to the pessimism that we're getting from the American, you can't do it, you can't get Obama, nothing will ever change. It's always been the same way. It's been the same way since the beginning of history. Man is evil, all the stuff with Job and I got yesterday when we were deploying at the bank. You know, all this stuff. Because people have no idea of what's going on in the world. No idea. If people had an idea that there's this revolution taking place, and that these countries, as I read at the beginning from the Sukarno setting up the non-aligned movement, that these countries are consciously modeling what they're doing on the American system, like how she's going with essentially a greenback policy for Argentina, but the bonds and other things. If people just have an idea that the American system has caught fire because of LaRouche in the rest of the world, we can cut through this pessimism. Now let me just say one more thing, because I would be remiss not to say it, because we've lost track of some of our activities in this continent. I wanted to just give an idea of where we have people active in the Americas, so that we can support them, you know. Okay, we've got, they have a conference call, by the way, every Thursday evening. I haven't been able to get on it until last week and this Thursday. But anyway, we've got organizers, you know, part-time probably, in Chile, Peru, Sonora, Mexico, of course we know, Tabasco, Mexico, the Dominican Republic, Venezuela, in Colombia, both in Bogota and in Cali, Argentina, Guatemala. LaRouche people printing these leaflets off of the computer and going out and doing what they call a tiraje, you know? Passing them out, going to the big square where you got tons of people going by, maybe like Times Square type of thing, or the Zocalo in Mexico, and just passing them out quickly, getting a whole rash out in a short period of time. Plus a lot of their organizing they just do, you know, through the internet. But in many cases it's just one or two people. But they're out there, one or two, fighting for and spreading LaRouche's ideas in these, you know, in these countries, sometimes seemingly all alone. So when some of us are standing at our table and we feel like we just dropped out of the sky and we're there in this hostile world, you know, think of Mauricio, for example, in Chile, going out in the morning twice a week and getting out leaflets and then getting on the computer and emailing people and sending out stuff and so on and so forth. So even though our numbers have been reduced, in Ibero-America, the internet is obviously a big advantage that we didn't have, say, 20 years ago. But we're organizing in these countries all the time. And LaRouche, and as our Venezuelan said, she said that the BRICS, that many of our former members, I don't know how to say it in as colorful a way as she said it in Spanish. They're collecting their heads back, getting their heads back on, you know, and beginning to realize, hey, LaRouche was right. She says, recabando la cabeza. So anyway, so that's what I wanted to say. It could be a lot more in depth. I hope that it would provoke people here to actually pursue in a little bit more depth LaRouche's activities in these countries. It'll take 10 classes, 10 presentations to cover it, but you get a little flavor of what's going on. And the fact that the governments of these nations, besides Argentina, besides Guyana, which you know about immediately, but many other governments in these nations are operating with LaRouche's ideas in mind, trying to navigate particular circumstances which may not be entirely favorable. They got their unique circumstances. But they're trying to navigate a situation with LaRouche in mind. This BRICS thing comes along now, and here you got two big guys, you know, Russia and China in particular. So it liberates a lot of these nations, like little Vietnam now asking to join. You know, it liberates a number of these nations now to say, no, we don't need to put our heads down and be afraid and just, you know, continue to starve and try to get by because the IMF says so. They now have champions, let's say, and the champions have been informed, as Leni went through, whenever it was, 2-3 weeks ago when she went through China and the Silk Road. The champions are informed by what LaRouche, beginning particularly in 1975, made explicit. And it's there's a new game in town. The only other game is thermonuclear war. And they can't win. Like Fred Bill says, we shall win. They cannot win, but we could all lose. Of course, that's the problem. So that's what I had to say. Any questions? Huh? Okay, Shan.
Actually, a comments and question. I'm asking this at an intelligent point of view. Although it was an idea of Lyndon LaRouche for a new world economic order, I understand that the former chairman of Goldman Sachs Asset Management, Jim O'Neill, was coining BRICS nation. He was born and brought in England and known as British economics. Actually, he is a London boy. How can we trust him? I am a little bit suspicious of him.
Okay. Well, if I understand your question entirely, you're saying that the term the BRICS, or the term New World Economic Order, the term the BRICS came from somebody who was from World Bank?
No.
From Goldman Sachs?
Goldman Sachs.
Yeah, but what does that have to do with the fact that, do you somehow think that he is orchestrating Russia, China, and India to do what they're doing?
No, actually, although, you want me to read again?
No. I don't, if you're just looking from the standpoint of this name or idea of BRICS, is that the idea supposedly came from somebody from Goldman Sachs, maybe it did. But what the BRICS is not what Goldman Sachs wants, number one. Number two, you know, you're from a former British colony as I am, that the British think they're very clever, where they set certain things in motion, where they pretend to support certain ideas, when in fact they may have the name New World Economic Order, but they mean exactly the opposite of what we mean and what is generally known by this chronology that I went through of the New World Economic Order. I mean, you had this, you know, you have this process, like I'm sure you know, Davos. You have a number of other individuals, presidents, groups, who put out a certain, who come under, let's say, George Soros's money or something like that. But what you have to realize is that we are in a period in history where even people who are British and who have been scuzzballs are being forced, not because they want to, but forced to bend to reality. This is the thing. This is the question of when I say, and when LaRouche says that the world has changed suddenly, it's not a process where this person goes through a period of years and convincing and so on and so forth. No. One thing LaRouche said many years ago, he said that, you know, he said, the British have no permanent allies, only permanent interests. And there are people inside the oligarchy, which is not a monolith by any means. There are people inside the oligarchy who are sensible enough to understand that sometimes in history, when you're outnumbered, you might have to take a couple of steps back. Maybe in their mind, back up for a couple of decades, because they think in spans, and we'll live to fight another day, 30 years down the road. And so you have, you know, in The Economist and some of these leading British papers, you have writers in those papers that are touting the BRICS, that are touting the idea of, for their own purposes, dumping the dollar, even though the BRICS has not said that explicitly, and pushing these lines for two reasons. Number one, for their temporary interests, but also because they want to shape the BRICS in such a way as to get the gullible American population to believe that the BRICS is an anti-American thing. And we get that from some people, oh, this is the new world order, they're anti-American, etc. So, you know, we know, you know, that when you're dealing with the British, who've been at this game for hundreds of years, to say they can't be trusted is an understatement. But what I'm saying to you is, even with that in mind, reality is forcing some people in the oligarchy to cut their losses, if only temporarily. And that is to our advantage. We may never convert them. I'm not saying that some of them are going to become, you know, LaRouche acolytes or something. But the reality which LaRouche has impelled over 40 years under various names, New World Economic Order, New Financial System, New Development Bank, or whatever, and these names have been used by other people for their own purposes, not necessarily meaning what LaRouche is meaning, and deliberately so, to actually change what LaRouche actually means, to have it mean something else than what LaRouche actually means. That's the game. That's the British game. Our job is to go out and let the American population know that the American Revolution has caught fire again in much of the world. We don't care if they call it the American Revolution, the New World Economic Order, the New Financial Order, whatever they call it. But there's certain policies and certain principles, like I read from the non-aligned founding document there earlier, that are known by people the world over. They're identified with the American system, just as Sukarno cited Franklin Roosevelt and the American Revolution. And what we have to do in this country is we have to get the American people to understand that this revolution has caught fire again in much of the world. We've got big potential allies now, and we should join it, because if we don't, as LaRouche says, you know, the alternative is too horrible to contemplate. But that's the thing. Shan, this is very serious. You cannot be, years ago we used to use the term nominalist, in the sense that you take things at face value because somebody from Goldman Sachs said it, and if LaRouche says New World Economic Order, or LaRouche says the BRICS is good, but yeah, you know, there was a guy pushing the BRICS 2 years ago, and he was a scuzzball from Goldman Sachs. Well, two things could be happening. Either he's calling the New World Economic Order, the BRICS, something entirely different, or he may have been forced to change, maybe not completely, but to alter his perspective, maybe simply for temporary gain, and that is to our advantage. You follow what I'm saying? It's very important.
Well, the irony is, remember, they did launch the BRICS as a counter to what LaRouche was organizing around the Eurasian land bridge originally.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're right, because it was launched as a counteraction to what LaRouche was doing. But then, okay, it's in this situation, their idea has been shoved down the toilet.
Yeah. And see, the other thing is that if we don't straighten out the United States, it might become an anti-American thing. If we don't straighten out the United States quickly, you're going to have 60 whatever percentage of humanity is going to end up being part of this operation because there are countries joining every day. You might have a whole lot of people against the United States, and that would be crazy because the ideas come from the American system, and they come particularly in the last half century or so from an American named Lyndon LaRouche. Yeah.
One thing I think is very instructive is that he goes through how these transformations, largely by LaRouche's intervention in terms of introducing specific ideas on how to solve the problem, how to rebuild the economy, but also just the general collapse and circumstances actually changing these presidents and these nations in South and Central America. Made the reference to the guy who got elected by the Cocaleros, right?
Yeah.
And then he makes this transformation.
Yeah.
The thing that I think is instructive for us is really what potential exists now inside the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically because, especially the fact that Lynn is an American, the history that we've had here, that really we are in a very good situation to create that kind of, we are in that situation of a very rapid transformation of political officials, bankers who,
in the United States.
Yeah, years ago, probably weren't thinking anything about LaRouche's ideas. They had their own agenda, their own insanity they were pursuing. But now, because of the situation, because also the way that the formation of the BRICS Development Bank and this new system is coming together, that we have a tremendous potential right now to make that transformation here within the immediate weeks ahead. And that it's the people in this room that are going to be a determining factor in that. I mean, really, just the point that people really commit themselves now. We really can consolidate this victory around the BRICS development in a very short period of time.
Yeah, and also, go out on the street and look around. The United States has been reduced to the conditions of when Argentina was at its worst, on its knees, which Argentina is not now because of leadership. Not just her husband before. You see how she talks about we're going to have this nuclear one and we're going to build the other nuclear one and we got the best scientists and all these other things. But if you just think back maybe 20 years, you would never have believed 20 years ago that the United States would be in the condition that it is today. You would never believe it. And, because we kind of lived through it and it's been a quote-unquote slow process, you kind of didn't know, we noticed it, but, it's not like if you went away or you live in another country and then you came to the United States 20 years later and you're thinking, is this the same country? They have destroyed this country, George Bush and Barack Obama. Yeah. And so, in a time like this, people, including people that we meet in Congress, people that I've talked to in Sacramento and so on, and other people, bankers that we've met in the last few weeks have been reported to us, they may not particularly like LaRouche. He's kind of brash and how do you say, aggressive, and he talks like that, and he's too blunt and all this stuff. But why are they going with his policies? They may not even say his name. Why are they going with policies like Glass-Steagall and these other things? Why are they, when we're in the hallway in the Congress or at the subway stations, like, give me what you got on such and such? At the subway station where nobody can see them, they're not in front of the Capitol building. Give me what you got on such and such. Because they know LaRouche is right. They don't like him necessarily. He's too forthright and, blunt and stuff like that. They're grudgingly having to acknowledge that what he's warned about has happened. Exactly what he's warned about has happened. I remember when LaRouche was saying 20 years ago, he was saying, he said, I can't even remember where it was now. He was talking about Africa or someplace. And he said, you know, they're doing this and other terrible things, describing all these terrible things that they were doing to some particular country at the time in Africa. And he said, very rudely it seemed, what's so special about you Americans that you think that they're not going to do it to you? Some of, you know, the IMF, London, Wall Street. We're under IMF conditionalities to bail out the banks in the same way that these countries had to sterilize the women so they would only have 1 or 2 kids, so the social services won't have to help them feed the rest. In the same way that Argentina had to shut down the nuclear plant in 1994 and other things. In the same way that other countries had to shut all kinds of projects that were critical to feeding their people. In the same way today, they shut down the space program. They shut down San Onofre. They're cutting food stamps. Obama's wife says you should eat, I don't know, horse meat maybe instead of chicken.
No, horse meat.
Or whatever is cheaper, you know? That's what it's IMF conditionalities brought to the United States, just like LaRouche warned. And that's to our advantage in some respect, because the illusions that people harbored and have been clinging to have now been shattered. Now, are we going to have a riot? Or will they have been informed by our organizing of the alternative so that they know where the exits are and they can quietly go to the exits? LaRouche used to call it years ago, join the Survivors Club. Yeah, that's what he used to call it. He used to call these fellas that we were talking about the Survivors Club. They're dumping the IMF because they want to live. They like to eat, you know. And it's a terrible thing. It's a terrible thing what has been done to this country. And so even though you know, people there's a certain objective reason for pessimism, you can't let them be pessimistic for too long. It's just become self-indulgent and they're going to die. So we got to wake them up. Any more questions? We need some leadership. You see this lady, and you read some of these other people in this EIR. If people don't have this EIR, it's got a speech of hers, not this particular one. It's got a speech of Zuma of South Africa, who went back to South Africa and right away started talking about gearing up their nuclear technology. You want to say, what's it with nuclear and all these people, you know? Bolivia, all these places. And you read their speeches, you know, there's something higher that is informing them than any kind of pragmatic political considerations like before. And then, like how Deborah read, talking about LaRouche, quoting LaRouche, talking about creativity and creating a new humankind and stuff like that. You see the echoes of what they're saying. And they're putting their lives on the line. I mentioned to you some of them that got kicked out after saying such and such. Some of them got cooed, you know. Some of them got poisoned, like Fred Wills. Couldn't go back to Guyana after he made these speeches. Would have been killed had he set foot back home by the same government that he represented, that had now gone in with the IMF. And LaRouche says today that Helga Zepp LaRouche is wending her way to China, and he says, you know, it's this dangerous business. But that's the kind of leadership we need over here instead of this clown that we got named Obama.